This is one of countless examples of the Western Electric Model 500 telephone. Originally introduced in 1950, this telephone in its many colors and variants was used in pretty much every household and business in the United States well into and past the 1980s. See, until the 1984 divestiture of the Bell system, no one owned their telephones. They were the property of the telephone company and were leased to the customer. Western Electric was a wholly owned subsidiary of the American Telephone and Telegraph Company, with AT&T enjoying a monopoly as the telephone company for the entire United States throughout much of the 20th century. So this phone in every sense belonged to the phone company. The Model 500 telephone, along with the wall-mounted Model 554, is an iconic design by the firm of Henry Dreyfuss, a prolific designer whose focus on ergonomics shaped much of the mid-20th century. One of its most recognizable features is its ring. If your smartphone has an old phone option, it could very well be a recording of one of these phones. When touch-tone service was first introduced in 1963, the Model 500 was altered into the Model 1500, replacing the rotary dial with an array of buttons. In 1968, the Model 1500 was further refined into the Model 2500, which added the star key and the hash pound key. You see, children, before the advent of the touch-tone dialing system, telephones used a rotary dial. By repeatedly interrupting the phone's connection with the phone line through a process called pulse dialing, mechanically driven switching equipment would create an actual circuit between one telephone and another, possibly hundreds of miles away. To use this dial, the finger is inserted to the hole corresponding to the number desired, and the dial is dragged to the finger stop. When the finger is removed from the dial, it returns to its original position, creating a corresponding number of pulses as it travels. Smaller numbers were faster to dial, which is a large part of why big US cities have area codes consisting of small numbers, with New York being 212, Chicago 312, and Los Angeles 213. Poor Honolulu was late to the party, getting the terribly long-winded 808. Anyway, the Model 1500 and 2500 did feature an altered faceplate to accommodate the push buttons, but almost everything else stayed the same. Ignoring this model's added modular connection between the handset and wall cord, everything from the cradle back is exactly the same. Take a look at the bottom and you'll see it's almost identical. And of course, the ringer stayed pretty much unchanged. These phones were designed to be in service for decades, and as such they are among the most robust objects in the home. Each and every one had to withstand at least one of these.
Yeah, well, have a nice day to you too.
Sometimes they'd even have to endure one of these. That pretty much sums up why these were in service so long. They were robust, they worked, and were easy to repair. Their modular construction meant each component was easy to replace, and since there were millions of the same phone in service, every telephone technician would be intimately familiar with what could go wrong and how to fix it. The phone was so reliable, though, that they didn't often need repair. Sitting at the back are a pair of bells. These are what make the distinctive ring, with the pitch interval between them a delightful major third. There's a striker sitting next to one bell and a good distance from the other. When it receives a phone call, the roughly 20 Hz 90 volt electricity that drives the ringer will energize this solenoid and repeatedly pull the striker into this bell and push it into the other. The farther bell can be moved with the help of a thumb wheel on the bottom, and this adjusts the volume of the ringer. Less distance between the bells restricts the movement of the striker, which makes the ring softer. Even when switching to the touch-tone keypad, the interior construction of the phone was virtually the same. Take a look at the ringer and it's got the same bells and the same striker, though there is a slight pitch variance between each phone. This example ditched the all-metal construction for some cheaper plastic components, and the bracket the bells rest on was broken and needed repair. Nevertheless, you can see that much of the design in these telephones is the same, with the exception of the keypad/dial and the network electronics. Being a fixture of American life for so long means these phones made their way into countless movies and television shows.
Boy, I sure hate to let Maria down like this.
Go to desk, answer telephone. Bialystok Bloom, Bialystok Bloom.
Mr. Chambers? Kevin Harkins?
I better give him a call and find out what this is all about.
I need to work on my attitude. Bye then.
Since the phones were so ubiquitous, any television show or movie made between 1950 and 1984 and beyond, in which a character answers a telephone call, is going to have one of these phones ring.
Backup crew has to set up the guest list and book the hotel room. Swagger.
Yeah.
Hello?
Yeah, is this Marge?
You gonna answer that?
I've quit better jobs than this. Ghostbusters, what do you want?
Fine.
Cheers.
Studio 6.
We got a green light.
These were in service long after 1984. In fact, this Model 500 is marked 1988 and was originally the property of Saskatchewan Tel. Apparently, it took a while for Saskatchewan to get on board with touch-tone dialing. It's very possible, though, that this phone is actually much older and was sold to SaskTel and refurbished, with the manufacturer being ITT and not Western Electric. Regardless, even into the 90s, these phones were common at home and in the movies, too. Now, before you call up and complain that there was also the Princess phone and the Trimline phone, I recognize the existence of all these variants and others. However, the Model 500 in its original desk phone configuration was by far the most common telephone, and thus we're just going to ignore the specialty phones for now. Anyway, back to the ring. If you're producing a TV show or movie and you need a phone to ring, there are a few ways to do it. One of which is to actually wire the phone into a ringer circuit, which can make the phone ring with the press of a button. This has the advantage of creating a very realistic sounding ring, as the acoustics of the set will affect the ring just like it does everything else. It can also make timing for the actors easier, as they can actually react to the phone's ring. Or you could go a step further and actually make the telephone functional by connecting it to a real phone line. Then you could actually call it. This has the added advantage of making the one-sided telephone call far more believable, as the actor could actually be talking to someone on the other end. This could be impractical for set design, though, and adds expense to the production. Your third option is to cheat. Since you could hear this phone ring in any household, office, or business, and every phone sounded pretty much the same, you could just add a stock recording in post. Doing this allowed the actors to simply answer the phone on their own time, and it also eliminated potential problems from poor microphone placement or high levels of background noise. But sometimes you can tell when this has been done, and surprisingly there seem to be some very old recordings that were being used well into the age of digital sound. In the days of analog recording technology, two significant things to avoid were what are called wow and flutter. For example, a recording made on a tape requires that the tape move at precisely the same speed without any variation. Otherwise, the pitch of what's being recorded can vary along with the tape speed. Oftentimes this can go unnoticed, but when the recording is of a tone, it can be quite pronounced. This 2000 Hz sine wave should sound like this. But if recorded onto a tape with a tape recorder that has a worn capstan or any number of other issues, the tone might come back out sounding like this. That's flutter, and it can be quite annoying. Since the bells in these telephones produce a constant pitch, it's easy to tell a recording from a real ring. If you hear any flutter in the sound of this phone, you know you must be listening to an analog tape recording. Of course, movies and TV shows used tape recorders for many years, so some flutter was to be expected in older films. But sometimes you hear a very slow, distinctive wow, which is, by the way, technically just very slow flutter. Take a listen to this telephone ring from the film Trading Places.
Hello? Oh. Hello, Mr. Duke, sir.
Did you hear how the pitch dipped as it rang? Listen again.
Hello? Oh.
The pitch rises and falls as the telephone rings. This pitch variation continues as the vibration of the bells decay. This wouldn't happen with recording equipment used on set, because a tape recorder would rarely, if ever, introduce wow as pronounced as this. Where this wow comes from is almost certainly a vinyl record. I've put the sound of the phone ringing in Audacity so I could place some markers on where the pitch falters. This first marker is where the pitch peaked, and the second is at its lowest. I placed the third marker at the next peak.
Hello? Oh. Hello? Oh. Hello? Oh.
The time from peak to peak was 1.784 seconds. Why is that significant? Because a record with a speed of 33 1/3 RPM will make 1 revolution every 1.8 seconds. This is the new CBS audiophile sound effects library, the only audiophile guaranteed to never start an argument. Discs like this could be used as a source of any number of sounds. Now, these particular discs don't have a telephone ring, but they have plenty of other stuff. A tricky thing about vinyl records, though, is that unless the disc is exactly perfectly centered, the pitch will rise and fall with each rotation. This happens because with an off-center record, the speed of the groove as it travels past the stylus will repeatedly increase and decrease. It's not that uncommon for the center hole of a disc to be punched just a little bit off-center, and the result is the dreaded wow. Listen to this recording from the official album of Epcot Center. That's pretty bad. You can actually see the stylus moving left and right with each rotation, which shows just how off-center this record's hole was punched. This is probably what's happening when you hear this phone ring.
Hello?
Because the recording is of a pair of bells which have a constant pitch, it's easy to discern if the pitch has faltered at all. Many films were made that seem to use recordings from old vinyl discs. I'm guessing film studios had just archived these recordings and used them again and again. Many people might not notice it, but those with a very good ear for pitch, or the pedantic, will. And I definitely have, and it bugs the crap out of me.
It's a semitone higher! A semitone! At least!
But what's most interesting to me is that these recordings just kept on being used even into the 90s. Take a listen to the phone ring in this scene from Terminator 2.
Hello?
Janelle, it's me.
John?
Here.
That's even worse than the last one.
Hello?
Opening it in Audacity and adding markers gives a time between the peaks of about 1.85 seconds, close to the 1.8 seconds per revolution of a 33 1/3 RPM record. But the really pedantic viewers out there might know that this sound effect is not only riddled with wow, it's also the wrong ring. John Connor's mom, and I'm putting that in air quotes there, answered a trimline phone.
Hello?
The trimline phone only had one bell in its ringer and did not sound like the Model 500. It should have sounded like this clip from Argo. How's that for pedantry? Now, because it's the wrong ring, we know it's a recording anyway, though it hasn't yet made its way to the Goofs page on the IMDb. Who wants to add it? But the fact that the film is from 1991 makes it hard to believe that digital sound recording equipment wasn't being used on set. And it's also funny to me that no one had bothered to make new recordings of these telephones ringing. There are millions of these floating around. How hard can it be to make a new digital recording? But I digress. As a side note, you may have noticed I used a clip of the Dick Van Dyke Show. On air from 1961 until 1966, this show is riddled with Model 500s just like this. But throughout the show, they use a completely different ring.
Butcher, I gotta take the roast out of the freezer.
Hi. Oh! That loud at night. That's better.
To be honest, that sounds like it came from an alarm clock. I checked on YouTube for older Model 500s just in case the ringer had changed, but there's a red Model 500 from 1957 that sounds just like these two. The link's down below if you're interested. Making a movie or TV show is a huge undertaking, and the sound designers deserve a lot of credit for all the post-production work they do. Much of the sound you hear in a film comes not from microphones on set, but from the people working behind the scenes to make it all sound real and believable. Terminator 2 actually won the Oscar for Best Sound Design, but man does that phone ring bother me. Thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed the video. If this is your first time coming across the channel and you liked what you saw, please consider subscribing. You can also support the channel through Patreon. If you're interested in making a totally voluntary contribution, please check out my Patreon page. Thanks for your consideration, and I'll see you next time.